Hey everyone, welcome to Shred the Veil. Today we are going to share some footage from the 2001 disclosure project that Dr. Greer put together. This footage was actually recorded in 2000, and it is our grandfather's testimony that he gave that is finally now out in the public domain. When the disclosure project happened in 2001, these 21 military witnesses came forward, giving their testimonies at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., about their experiences with UFOs and extraterrestrials, testifying before Congress. And our grandfather was one of those. He was in the Air Force and the National Reconnaissance Office during his career. He had a clearance level, 38 levels above top secret, called a cosmic clearance. And so he started speaking out about this this topic, in the mid 90s. And that's where I guess somehow he got introduced to Dr. Greer. And we actually have in some files of the invitation letter from Dr. Greer for the press conference in 2001, giving the agenda and everything that they would be doing that weekend. But anyway, it's after the disclosure project happened, Dr. Greer released a DVD series in the early 2000s that had the witness testimony, not actually the actual press club hearing, but prior to that, where they gave like a full testimony of their experiences and what they saw through their careers. And it was very much edited, and there's just like certain clips that he put together. We've never seen the full raw footage of that until Dr. Greer, 20 years later, finally released this archive footage showing the full testimony of everybody, and he put that out there. So we've just recently got to finally see the whole story of it and everything that he presented. So that's what we're going to share with you guys today. And there's a few things we want to kind of introduce here to give a little context to the situation, and I'll let Derek kind of kick that off.
Yeah, so our grandfather, by the time that he was approached by Dr. Greer, and then interviewed, and with this footage that you're going to see, he had already been declining in his health. He had already had maybe at least one mini stroke, maybe a couple, by the time he was there to record with Dr. Greer, and I believe they met somewhere in New Mexico, in Santa Fe or something. And there's Dr. Greer wasn't there, but somebody else was interviewing him behind the camera and asking him these questions. And he obviously had a list of questions based on what Dr. Greer wanted to ask. And the letters, actually, the correspondence beforehand, to kind of vet out who these people were and if they were a good fit to come and be a part of the disclosure project. It even showed the response of the survey that the guy filled out, saying, yeah, he seems to be a little bit he's older and obviously a little out of his normal health, like declining in his health, or seems to be hard to hear sometimes the way he speaks. And that's a sign of obviously the stroke that he had. So you're going to see that, and you'll also see that Nancy Redstar, who helps transcribe the book that he came out with, Life with His Cosmos Clearance, she is actually sitting right beside him during the interview. And I think that goes to show that he not only probably he wanted maybe some help with the communication if he was unclear at certain times to the interviewer, but I think he also was probably hesitant to go just alone and by himself to whoever who was asking these questions, and for him to finally come out with all this information. He probably wanted to have somebody there with him. And so I think that's also why Nancy was there. She doesn't say a whole lot really during the whole interview process, but maybe towards the end, she talks about the book and the fact that they're developing this book together. And it's interesting that the book at that time was still called Truth or Consequences, and that was the original title. And we have draft copies of that. I still have that from the storage that he had, and some interesting things that in the drafts that came out that he didn't put in the book. So maybe we'll disclose that at some point. But we just want to give you that background as far as what you're going to see in the video and how his health is and his appearance looks. And we can even show you a video from the late 90s, maybe only 5 years earlier or less, where he's in very good condition. he hadn't had the stroke yet, and he talks very well. So that way you can see the difference there, what it's like.
Yeah, just for contrast, so you can see how he could articulate himself when he is at full health capacity. We'll go ahead and show that clip right now, and then we'll move on with the disclosure footage.
For your own individual conscious and mind have to come to that conclusion. But what they said was that they have been coming here for thousands of years since the beginning. And that they do this when things need change. They don't come to save anybody. I'm going to load this up, take us off anywhere, anything. But when we begin to destroy so many other type beings, there are beings here that we don't see, we don't know. Sometimes we catch a glimpse or we catch a feeling. Okay? But we have now, since nuclear weapons have come into being, destroyed some of these beings, just like we destroyed some of the beings that we do see, like the carrier pigeons and the buffalo and other creatures that we've eliminated from disappearing.
And so, yes, like we said, that was footage from the late 90s, just a few years before the Disclosure Project video was recorded. And you can see he's more coherent and, has some full uninterrupted thoughts. When you look at the Disclosure Project footage, you'll notice like sometimes it seems like maybe he's getting emotional or excited and his voice gets real high pitched. And it's just hard to understand him sometimes. How he articulates things is kind of scattered. So it's definitely, you could see the impacts that stroke had on him, comparing, what you just saw to what you're about to see.
Exactly. And I was just going to add that he was a professor. He ended up getting a master's, I believe, just so that he could become a professor at the Dallas College. And he was a flight instructor there, but he also taught the Rancher book for many years. So he was very good at, basically kind of being a lecturer in a way and speaking to people. So it just goes to show how his state of health did decline quite a bit. And you can see that in the tapes. But we can, maybe, I don't know if it's worth summarizing some of what he's going to talk about. I think this first part of the tape is a good introduction of his background, of his clearance level. He mentions even the ACIO, not only the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, but the ACIO and the involvement, or at least in the levels of clearance you need to get to some of those organizations. And so this will be a good introduction of him before the Disclosure Project, came out with their edited versions of his talking points. So I'm so glad that we can finally reveal this. And it's been, like Dan said, it's actually been 25 years now, just about, since they actually recorded this. So a lot of what he says too, towards the end of these tapes, you'll see that a lot of stuff he talked about is very relevant to current events and what's out there in the public just in the past few years. So gives a lot of credibility to it.
And one thing that you'll find towards the end where Nancy Red Star does talk, and which we're very grateful for her contribution to having our grandfather put this book together, that really laid out a lot of information for us and opened our eyes to what he was privy to and really started us on this journey that we've been on to discover the truth. She was doing a series of books called Star People. And she wrote 3 different books, and it was basically a series of interviews with Native American people from all over the United States, even in Central South America, and the topic of extraterrestrials and through the history of these ancient cultures and what they meant in those cultures and the stories and the narratives that they grew up with and the traditions. And it was really good book, really excellent book. I read the first one; it was very good. But she interviewed our grandfather as part of her 3rd book, and because he has some Native American heritage. And so he was one of the interviewees for her series. And it turned out that he had so much content and such an interesting story that she was not expecting, that she wanted to really put this all together in its own book. So really, without her, this book would have never happened. Her initiating that and her reaching out to our grandfather and starting all of this, especially towards the end where he was deteriorating in health. He probably couldn't have gotten all this information out very succinctly on his own. So we're very grateful for Nancy's efforts into this disclosure movement. So,
And check out her books called, the series is Star Ancestors, I believe. There's 3
Star
books.
Ancestors, right? Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
There we go. Okay.
But I don't do that.
Okay.
Okay. Daniel S. Morris and Nancy Red Star, 2 partners in research and publication. Daniel has an extraordinary and in-depth military and intelligence career, and Nancy, as his co-author, is bringing this information to light. Daniel, if you could describe for us exactly what your service record was in the United States Air Force and in the U.S. Intelligence Service. What years did you serve?
Well, I went in when I was about 19 years old. And the first duty I had was in radar. And I was fortunate that I worked with a genius that really built from vacuum tubes to transistors and printed circuits. He converted what is called the SIF, Security Information System. And then during World War II, it was known as IFF, Identification of Friend or Foe. After the war, it was the Security Identification Fixture. And today, every airplane that flies has a Mode 6 transponder in it. And he converted that for the Air Force to, it was old vacuum tubes, and he changed it to transistors and printed circuits where it could be carried in fighters, small airplanes. Before that, you had to have it on a ship you had to have an airplane large enough to carry the vacuum tubes and everything. But pretty soon, and even today, you can carry it in your hand, put it in your boat, or put it in your airplane. You can put it in your car, carry it anywhere. Now, that along with the black boxes that give you the performance readings on the airplanes. Airliner crashes, what you look for first is the black boxes. And then they send them off and examine them and tell you why the airplane crashed. What went wrong with the airplane. The other box will tell you what went wrong with the pilots.
So your background is in reconnaissance and signal.
That's true. You know what a cryptographic center is? That's where all the coded messages are sent. And that's secret. Of course, that don't mean much. Top secret. There's about 38 levels above top secret.
And your position at one time was
something that is above top secret, say the 38 levels, is just to be classified as cosmic secret. It is the top, all of those clearances.
And is that the security clearance you held?
Yes.
So can you state what level of security clearance you have?
The highest is cosmic. That's, okay, I'll tell you right off now, that's UFOs, aliens, and particlization. Now, like you heard a while ago, there's only probably about 25 people in the world that know things that are known at that level. No president has had that level, has ever been cleared for that level. Eisenhower was the closest. Now, Eisenhower was a military man, and he liked things always he could blame somebody. He wanted somebody in charge. Well, there's several intelligence agencies. The Army had it, the Air Force had it, the Navy had it, and then there was several secret intelligence agencies. One that did not exist, it was so secret, was the NRO. You couldn't mention NRO.
What does NRO stand for?
The National Reconnaissance Organization. Then, if you're on that level, there's an organization worldwide called ACIO. That's Alien Contact Intelligence Organization. If you pay your dues, you follow the rules, you can benefit, your government is allowed to benefit from that organization's information. Now, some people call it the high frontier. The Navy intelligence refer to them themselves that way sometime. And they all work together. Fact of it is, Air Force intelligence, naval intelligence, and the NRO were at one time all in a certain part, Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. Mm-hmm. And they all worked in that whole building, and it was all released to who was cleared for it to be released to. And most of the satellite interpreters were there. Most of the intelligent interpreters from the Air Force, the Army, the Navy was there. That's where they worked and interpreted. Now, Eisenhower wanted somebody to be in charge. He tried the CIA director, and it didn't work. CIA was working primarily for itself. Most of the intelligence directors of the services were working for themselves. So he said, I want it to be independent. I want it to be civilian. I want it to be some of our top scientists. And so it was organized under the name, the NRO, which was kept secret for years. Only about a year ago could you ever say NIO or print it. It was never printed prior to that time.
It was during the Eisenhower administration then?
Yes.
What year was the NRO set up?
Well, about 1968 is when it came into being independently. Now, before that, during the war, we had the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, and that was mostly spy soldiers. You know, men from certain part of the armed forces was formed under the OSS. And we, at the beginning of World War II, didn't have a spy network like Germany did, like Britain did. So that was our first try at having a spy network.
Were you personally involved with the OSS?
Well, I never spied for the OSS, but the information I had access to, being an Air Force intelligence. And so if you were cleared and you had a high enough clearance, crypto clearance, you get in crypto centers, you know, if you go be staying somewhere. And another thing that gave me another high security clearance was I was a Conrad courier. Now, if you don't know what Conrad courier means, sometimes during the hot and cold war, you saw the president, there was always a military warrant officer with him that carried a little bag. Those were the war codes. And he could declare war, he would get the code for the day, and it was two man's control all the way down through the submarines, to the missile launch systems and the bombers, and every nuclear weapon was controlled by the president through that little bag that warrant officer carried next to him. And he was never out of really his president's presence during that time.
He was handcuffed to that bag, wasn't he?
So those codes were carried by two men all the time. And it was transferred to all the commanders, you know. throughout the field, and sometimes they would fly on civilian airplanes. The guys from the base, 2 guys, always armed, would go to the airfield and meet 2 guys that were Conrad couriers, and they would give him the codes. They exchange the codes. One guy would identify one guy, the other guy would identify one guy, and sometimes you'd be tested to see if you identified the proper guy by looking at him, by looking at his identification, so on and so forth. And they always, run checks. You didn't know whether it was a check or not, so you had to be very careful that you transferred the codes to the right people. And then if you identified yourself properly with the proper identification, then they would give you the code. Then you'd take it back to the base. And then you would pass it on to 2 men always on the base. And then it would be distributed to the war rooms, the commanders, operations officers, and whoever was in charge. Let's say it was a radar installation. Well, the controllers that was operating the radars and controlling the bombers and controlling the fighters and everything, for them to authenticate that the message was really from the president, they would have to look up and open it, break their seals and open and see if it was the message that was transmitted to them by the president. If it was, we'd go to war with lots of bombers. We'd launch missiles from nuclear submarines.
How long did you serve as a courier?
3 years.
What were those years?
From about exactly when I try to remember, let me see, 47, 40, about 48, 49, 50. And the Korean War come along and I went to Korea. And so that's when I got out of that.
Okay. And when did you enter the NRO?
After I retired from the Air Force, I was in the Air Force for 22 years. And I was given the opportunity, you want to go to work for somebody else? With your clearances, you could go to work for somebody else. And I said, doing what? They said, well, same thing as doing for the Air Force, but for somebody that doesn't exist. What are you going to pay me? I'm going to pay you good. Okay. So it was worth, plus I enjoyed it because I was learning, things. And in the Air Force, I'd already discovered that there was UFOs and aliens.
In an official capacity?
Yes, in an official capacity.
Could you describe that official capacity in the Air Force?
The first hard proof to me, see, I'd read all these messages, and probably you've heard of, Cooper, and he did for the Navy what I did for the Air Force. And I would read messages, and he would read a message, and he would query me if I had read that message. And I'd say yes or no. And I'd go look it up and I'd find, okay. Now, I found, there was a lot of other stuff that, not only from him, but from people in the field. Of course, then it was a great cover-up. You had Project Blue Book, 2 or 3 other ones that followed Blue Book and so forth that was designed to cover that up. And personally, I didn't think it was right. So I would keep things, information. And so I was stationed when I was working with this genius that invented the Mode 6 transponder. He would talk to me when we'd be working late at night and everything. And he'd be working on other projects. He'd start telling me things that was secret that he was working on. And then he would sometimes catch himself and he said, But you don't have a need to know that. So I can't tell you that, but he would, because we'd be working alone and everything. And so I learned from him a lot of things that was classified, top secret, cosmos, so on and so forth. So the Air Force would call me in every once in a while and say, did he ever tell you about this? Say yes. And so when I retired from the Air Force, they knew that I knew some of this stuff. And so that's why they gave me the chance to go to work for somebody else that knew that too. And so it wasn't cloak and dagger, wasn't that kind of stuff. It was intelligence, gathering information. Now, sometimes they'd have a reader, and the reader would be given a subject, and she could go just about anywhere she wanted to, any library, any collection of secret documents of some government agency, so on and so forth. And she would bring all that, report and turn it in. Now, there just happens to be one of those women living right across that river. She retired from the NRO a few years ago. One time as a plain white government car drives up out there, and a woman gets out and says, are you Mr. Salter? And after all those years, I got cautious. Who wants to know? And she says, she introduced herself, and she said, I says, you work for the government? She said, yes. I said, you down here checking on me? And she says, no. She says, down here for a conference in Albuquerque. And I bought that property over there a couple of years ago, and I'm going to retire pretty soon in 2 years, and I'm going to build on it. And there's no road going down to it. So I want to go down to your property and look at it from this side of the river. And I says, okay. So we walk down and we're talking and I'm asking her questions. And I says, what agency do you work for the government? And she said, I said, inside the Beltway, yes. And she says, and finally I asked her again, what agency? And she says, the NRO. And I stopped. I said, well, no, you're down here checking on me. I knew it. I mean, the chances of two people from that small agency meeting out here in Taos in New Mexico, I said, you're down here checking on me. She said, no, I'm not. And she said, I really did buy this place, and I'm going to move down here. I said, well, you chose the right place. She says, what do you mean? She says, do you mean a nest of spies? I said, yeah. And I said, well, that's quite a coincidence. And so I see her about once a year when we have the homeowners meeting, because some people out here don't understand or wouldn't know what the NRO was, but it has been mentioned at those meetings that that's where she's retired from, but she doesn't, let that out. But her and I had some good conversations, and so there was a release made by several agencies, the CIA, the NRO, and this Defense Intelligence Agency, all the military intelligence agencies, and the National Security Agency, and the killers working hard. They're the guys that when it comes necessary, a problem be removed, there. If you watch James Bond, they're 00 agents, if you get my meaning. And Secretary of Defense Forstall was the first real powerful known person that was eliminated because he was going to release the information. And nobody has ever paid for that crime. That crime has never been really thoroughly investigated by forces to see what happened to him. But most people know that he was thrown out the window of the hospital, and he wasn't killed by being thrown out the window, but he never got up alive. There are other people that's been eliminated for what they know. One was a friend of mine, Phil Snyder, who was worked for out here in New Mexico, building the tunnels, and the deepest and biggest one that he was involved with was the Ducey underground facility that when they he was an explosive expert, and when he blasted through this one, it wasn't ours, it was some other alien's place. So our response is to shoot. So we did, and they shot. And he was hit from up here down to the bottom of his stomach with a radiation laser. And from that day on, he had a scar from here clean up to here. And when he started turning public and was speaking in public and released a lot of stuff on his personal computer to the public, they was going to get rid of him. He knew it. And he told me the last time I saw him, he said, "Man, I don't care." He said, "I'm in so much pain, if they get rid of me, it would be a blessing." Well, they did get rid of him. And there's a movie that depicts him speaking, and then his roommate happened to be a captain in the Nevada police force at Las Vegas, and it would have all been quiet if it hadn't been for him. But they said he committed suicide. Well, he didn't. And his roommate went and got the coroner, and he says, "Come down, I want to show you this body." He says, "You examine that guy again. Watch the circle around his neck." He says, "That was made with a piano wire. You check it." He says, "He could not close his hands, and he couldn't lift his arms above, his head since he was shot with that laser." He says, "How could he have committed suicide?" Well, the coroner did change the official records that it was not suicide, but it never got changed officially. I think the world should know that. And I know that Phil loved this country, and he thought it was bypassing our former government, the way it was set up. And there was too many black projects going on that none was approved by our Congress. No Congress ever voted, on these black projects. And he believed the American people had a right to know what they're spending their money for and what we were capable of doing. And he started talking, so they got rid of him. But I know, and I take his words to heart, that they put him out of his misery, really, because he was dying slowly of radiation poisoning. There's been several other people, like Cooper, that now nobody can find Cooper. Last I heard, he was purposely out of hiding, and they had made 2 threats against his life. Unfortunately, he was run off the road by plane vans, and he went down the hill and was crashed, and his wife knew about the time he should be home, and she started looking for him. And she happened to run no way he came home, and she went there. And she happened to see the car and go down and get him and saved him at that time, got him to the hospital. So this whole project of bringing this out in the open will probably take other people too. But myself, I'm 73 years old, and I've had a good life and no regrets, and I've loved this country, and I've been a Christian all my life since I was about 11 years old, and so I believe God wants us known, and I believe the cosmos wants us known, and I believe that if we don't break the secrecy, we're doing our people a great harm keeping it so secret. And if we don't break it, I believe somebody else will, somebody outside of this planet. I believe some of the people that have been with us the last 50 years will break the secret. And they have now to certain people. Now, when I was a kid, I didn't know what channeling was, but I believe some channelers. And I have documents and proof that there was two great channelers that was up in Germany. One was in the Tool Society, and one of them was in the Viral Society. And that's all documentary. And if you will study the life of Hitler, Hitler was very interested in the occult and all the secret societies. And when he came to power, he made all the secret societies into one and made them join forces. And that through the channeling, he was given the information on UFOs. And that's where he started building them. But about the same time, now Nancy can tell you that her interviews and so on and so forth, that Brazil, there was two discovered in Brazil.
Okay, we're going to go into the international part of it. I'm going to structure the questioning so that we follow. It's easier to work with if we sort of stay on track.
Okay.
We'll get into that in a moment.
All right. What I've told you, is it going to make any difference in your life? You better wake up, better change, get interested, changing your life.